Good evening. That was a kind of a prompt. Good evening. Welcome to Pepperdine and the School of Public Policy. I'm Pete Peterson, the very grateful dean of this graduate policy program, and I'm delighted to welcome you here to the Wilburn Auditorium for tonight's debate. This has been a wonderful relationship that we've been building with our friends at the Steamboat Institute, and the third debate that we have co-hosted together here on our Malibu campus. And it's fair to say that the subject and topic for tonight's debate is one that is probably the most closely aligned with the work that we do here at the Policy School. Pepperdine and our School of Public Policy is uniquely committed to American civics. And tonight we will be debating that very topic. It's understood here that the Policy School, in preparing leaders for a polarized political environment, need to understand civic virtue and certainly to understand how public policy is made. One of the core texts that we use here at the Policy School, and certainly as part of our own commitment to civics, is Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. And as you can see, I brought my pocket edition here. And of course, Tocqueville, like many of the visitors from Europe to the United States, regularly remarked at the incredible level of civic knowledge that he witnessed in meeting Americans throughout the country, from the cities to the rural areas. I wanted to quote from just a passage here from Tocqueville that speaks to the importance. Obviously, I'm going back now to the 1830s, this part of American culture, what Tocqueville would call American mores of civics education. He writes this at one point: "I lived much with the people of the United States, and I cannot say how much I admired their experience and their good sense. Do not lead an American to speak of Europe. He will ordinarily show great presumptions and a rather silly pride. He will be content with those general and indefinite ideas that all countries are of such great help to the ignorant. But ask him about his country, and you will see the cloud that envelops his intellect suddenly dissipate. His language becomes clear, clean, and precise, like his thought. He will teach you what his rights are and what means he will use to exercise them. He will know according to what usages the political world conducts itself. You will perceive that the rules of administration are known to him and that he has made himself familiar with the mechanism of the laws. In the United States, the sum of men's education is directed toward politics. In Europe, its principal goal is to prepare for private life. The action of citizens in affairs is a fact too rare for Europeans to be foreseen in advance. In Europe, we often have the ideas and habits of private existence enter into public life, and we pass suddenly from the interior of the family into the government and of the state. One often sees us discuss the great interests of society, and in the same manner as we converse with our friends. Americans, on the contrary, almost always carry the habits of public life into private life. Among them, the idea of the jury is discovered in the school ground, and one finds parliamentary forms even in the ordering of a banquet. This is who Americans are. But one wonders if we're still that way. It's fair to say that there's a movement in civics education in the United States that stretches from the classical education schools that are growing up all across the United States at the K-12 level to the new and very impressive and exciting number of civics institutes that are popping up at large state-based colleges and universities around the country. But is this, by and large, a good thing? I think we can all agree that civics education is important. But with this new movement around civics education, are we doing it right? This is what tonight's debate is about. So as we care about civics education here at the School of Public Policy, we also care about civil and informed debate. And that's why we are so delighted to partner once again with our friends at the Steamboat Institute. And so to introduce tonight's speakers and to set the table for tonight's debate, please welcome up the director of the Steamboat Institute, Jennifer Schubert-Aiken.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dean Peterson, for welcoming us back to your beautiful campus again. This is the only campus where I really don't enjoy running because you have so many hills. So it's either all down or all up. But we truly do love coming back to Malibu and Pepperdine. It's always a treat to be here. I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. I know there are many other things you could be doing with your time. We also have people watching the live stream from all over the place. Josh, you'll be glad to know that there's a group called Latinos for Tennessee that hosts a watch party for just about every one of our debates. So hello to our friends with Latinos for Tennessee. Steamboat Institute was founded nearly 20 years ago with the mission of promoting America's founding principles and fostering an appreciation of the freedom we enjoy as Americans. We have hosted dozens of debates on college campuses across America over the past 8 years, visiting more than 30 campuses. With each of our debates, the emphasis is on developing your critical thinking skills, learning how to think, not what to think. Tonight is the third of 5 stops in our spring Campus Liberty Tour. In February, we visited UC Davis with a debate on whether scientific progress is best achieved through publicly funded research. Last week, in our hometown of Steamboat Springs, Colorado, we hosted a debate on whether expanded federal regulation of AI whether AI regulation should be expanded to safeguard the public interest. This debate was presented as part of a special one-day summit on the America 250 in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. You can find that entire program on our YouTube channel. On our third debate, actually, our fourth debate will be on April 13th at the University of Colorado in Boulder with a debate between John Bolton and Susan Rice on whether the U.S. is committing superpower suicide. So that should be an interesting discussion. And on June 23rd, we will wrap up the spring tour at the University of Wyoming, where we will host a debate on institutional neutrality, including George Washington law professor Jonathan Turley. This debate will be part of the Heterodox Academy Mountain West Regional Conference. With all of our debates, you can watch live from anywhere in the country on Steamboat Institute's YouTube channel. Be sure to sign up for our email list at steamboatinstitute.org to have the viewing links sent directly to your inbox. Follow us on social media, and we encourage you to always get a group of friends together if you think one of these would be interesting, and then have your own debate afterwards. As a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, Steamboat Institute relies on the support of many generous individuals and foundations to bring programs such as tonight's debate to college campuses all over the country. I would like to take just a moment to say a special thank you to our major sponsors, the Jack Roth Charitable Foundation, the Adolph Coors Foundation, the Diana Davis Spencer Foundation, Lined and Harry Bradley Foundation, the Arthur N. Roop Foundation, and Bruce and Marcy Benson for their support. All right, now for tonight's debate. In an era marked by deep political divides, rising distrust in institutions, and increasingly polarized public discourse, many Americans are asking a fundamental question: how did we get here? One explanation gaining traction points to the classroom. Civic education, once intended to equip students with a shared understanding of democratic principles, institutions, and responsibilities, has, some argue, eroded or fragmented over time. Without a common foundation in how government works and what citizenship entails, people may be more vulnerable to ideological echo chambers and partisan narratives. But is the decline of civic education truly the primary driver of today's partisanship, or is it merely one factor among many in a more complex cultural and technological landscape? We invite all of our audience members, including our live stream viewers, to respond with your view on this question. Is the failure of civic education in schools the primary cause of ideological partisanship in society today? Agree, disagree, or undecided? So feel free to pull out your phones. We want everyone to vote in the poll. Let us know what your opinion is. You will see it on the screens on the side here. If you are watching on the live stream, there is a link for voting in the poll. So we would like to see everyone vote. And then when the debate is over, we're going to ask you for your opinions again to see how opinions have shifted. I would like to introduce our speakers and moderator for this evening. So let's welcome them to the stage. And I will then introduce each of them while they remain seated. So speakers and moderator, please come on up. Let's give them a hand. Welcome you. Okay, now we've got our poll activated. This is great. So you can see that right now we have 24% undecided, 24% disagree with the resolution, and 52% agree with the resolution. So keep voting if you haven't already, and then when we're done with the debate, we're going to vote again and see if your opinions have shifted. Arguing the affirmative on tonight's resolution is Joshua Dunn, Executive Director of the Institute of American Civics at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. His research and teaching focus on constitutional law and history, education policy, federalism, and freedom of speech and religion. His books include Complex Justice, The Case of Missouri versus Jenkins, and Passing on the Right, Conservative Professors in the Progressive University. His research and commentary has appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, the LA Times, and other outlets. Professor Dunn previously taught at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, where he served as executive director of the Center for the Study of Government and the Individual, and as chair of the Department of Political Science. He began his teaching career at the College of William and Mary and was a fellow at the Miller Center of Public Affairs at the University of Virginia, where he received his Ph.D. in politics. Let's give a warm welcome to Professor Josh Dunn. Seated in the middle this evening, arguing the negative on tonight's resolution, is Timothy Messer-Kruse, Professor of Cultural Studies at Bowling Green State University in Ohio, the first university outside of California to establish an ethnic studies department. He earned his Ph.D. in history from the University of Wisconsin and is the author of 10 books, including The Trial of the Haymarket Anarchists, Terrorism and Justice in the Gilded Age, that won the Best Book in Labor History Award in 2012. Two more recent books include The Patriot's Dilemma, White Abolitionism and Black Banishment in the Founding of the United States of America, and Slavery's Fugitives and the Making of the U.S. Constitution. Professor Messer-Kruse has been a featured guest on NPR's Morning Edition and has been profiled in both the National Review and the Atlantic. In addition to academic journals, Professor Messer-Kruse essays regularly appear in the Chronicle Review, Jacobin, Inside Higher Education, Counterpunch, and Commonplace. His latest essay in Jacobin is online this week, and his latest essay in the Chronicle Review, Is Civics a Discipline?, will be out later this month. His latest book is a textbook, Unpatriotic Civics, which was released in January. Please give a warm welcome to Professor Timothy Messer-Kruse. Our moderator for this evening's debate is Kaylee McGhee White, editor-in-chief of Independent Women Features and a Fox News contributor. Kaylee was awarded Steamboat Institute's Blankley Fellowship for Rising Young Journalists in 2023. Kaylee previously served as the Restoring America editor at the Washington Examiner. She graduated from Hillsdale College with degrees in politics and journalism. And now I will turn it over to our moderator, Kaylee, to kick off our debate.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I would also like to remind everyone that through the QR code that you guys have, you'll also have the ability to submit questions to our two debaters tonight. So we will be doing Q&A section after a little bit. So please submit your questions there and I'll be able to go through them from that. But first I would like to invite Dr. Dunn up to make his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Kaylee. I also want to thank Dean Peterson and the School of Public Policy here. It's always great to be back in Malibu. Great to see the work that you're doing here. I also want to thank the Steamboat Institute and Jennifer. I have a long-time partnership with this Steamboat Institute, but first time actually participating in a debate. All the debates that we've done together, I've always been challenged by them, and I think we need more of this in our country today. So it's great to be here. I also want to thank all of you for being here. There are the things you could be doing, including watching March Madness. And with any luck, we'll be out in time to catch the scores for the late games tonight. And also for the students, thank you for being here. I hesitate to ask whether you're here under duress or inducement, but thanks. It's great to have you here. I also want to thank Professor Timothy Messer-Kruse. It's just an honor to be with him. He's a very accomplished scholar, really interesting work that he's done. Really interesting story in Wikipedia too. So if you have a chance afterwards, it's worth talking to him about that. So, ladies and gentlemen, I affirm the resolution that the failure of civic education in schools is the primary cause of ideological partisanship in our society today. Americans today do not simply disagree. We distrust, we caricature, we assume the worst, we demonize. Increasingly, citizens do not just think the other side is wrong, they think the other side is dangerous. That's not normal political disagreement or healthy political disagreement, that's ideological hostility. The question before us is, what is driving this? So I argue that the primary cause is the failure of civic education. Not because civic education explains everything, but because it explains the foundation, the condition that allows polarization to grow. So first, polarization is driven by misperception. Research on what's known as affective polarization shows something striking. Americans systematically exaggerate how extreme the opposing party is. They believe the other side holds more radical views than it actually does. And those exaggerations are strongly linked to partisan animus. In other words, people don't just dislike their opponents, they misunderstand them. And misunderstanding fuels hostility. So the next question then becomes, where do those misperceptions come from? Well, decades of research shows that citizens with lower political knowledge are far more prone to those factual errors of stereotyping and misinformation. When scholars talk about high knowledge for citizens, they don't mean experts. They mean citizens who can answer basic civic questions. What are the three branches of government? What does Congress do? How does federalism work? Those with higher civic knowledge are dramatically more accurate in their understanding of parties and policies. Those with lower knowledge are more likely to rely on group identity or partisan cues or other forms of distorted narratives. So when citizens do not understand how the system works, they cannot evaluate claims about it. They can't properly situate political disagreement, and so they fall back on identity and suspicion. So ignorance does not produce neutrality, it produces distortion. Civic knowledge, however, increases political tolerance. Recent survey data from Florida State University's Institute for Governance and Civics shows that citizens with high civic knowledge score 16 points higher on a scale of 0 to 100 on political tolerance than those with low knowledge. That difference represents a meaningful behavioral shift from a significant reluctance to engage to a clear willingness to engage with political opponents. Even more striking, the effect of civic knowledge is 2 to 5 times larger than the effect of general educational attainment. So in everyday context, being at school, at your workplace, in your local community, civic knowledge increases willingness to engage across differences by 15 to 18 points. The evidence therefore points in one direction. Civic knowledge does not inflame division, it moderates it. The problem is that schools are not prioritizing that knowledge. A nationally representative from RAND in 2020 of social studies teachers reveals something also quite striking. 80% of teachers, it's the highest category for them, say that their priority, their most significant priority, is ensuring that students are tolerant of other people in groups who are different from themselves. That's an admirable goal. but barely half, 53%, say that it is essential that students understand foundational concepts like federalism, separation of powers, and checks and balances. So there's an irony. We're prioritizing tolerance while deprioritizing the knowledge that actually produces tolerance. We're aiming at the outcome, but neglecting the mechanism, or we want the product, but not the process. And the evidence of that failure is concrete. National assessments show that only about 1 in 4 students demonstrate even basic proficiency in civics. And roughly a third like even a partial mastery of fundamental concepts like separation of powers, federalism, and constitutional rights. That does not disappear with age. We have survey upon survey showing that adult Americans have very low levels of civic knowledge. And at the same time, trust in core institutions such as Congress, the presidency, the courts, and the media continues to decline. So without a basic civil framework, citizens are less able to distinguish normal political conflict from genuine crisis. As well, teachers will often report that civics is neglected in their schools, that the emphasis is on teaching subjects which are tested or subject to high-stakes testing. So I think the evidence is that the failure of civic education is the primary cause. So in conclusion, a democracy cannot function if citizens cannot disagree without demonizing one another. And citizens cannot disagree constructively if they do not understand the system in which they are participating. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dunn. And not that I'm checking, but my bracket for March Madness is perfect right now. So a little bit of a dunk. Dr. Messer-Kruse, would you like to do your opening statement?
Good evening. It's really a great pleasure to be here tonight. As I was telling a few individuals before our debate, I think people who aren't really familiar with academia assume that academicians do this all the time. That's part of our job description is to engage in meaningful and constructive debate. But in fact, it's a very rare opportunity, and I want to thank the Steamboat Institute, Pepperdine School of Public Policy for making this possible. Because I've been teaching and writing now for years, and this is the first time I've been a part of a structured debate. So it's really an honor. It's really a pleasure. I also want to thank, of course, Dr. Josh Dunn for setting the table and for all of his important work in advancing, I think, our shared goals. Now, a couple caveats before I begin. First of all, a lot of my argument here, I think, is going to land sort of diagonally to the assumptions of the evening. And before I go any further, I just want to clarify a couple things so I'm not misunderstood. First of all, I do believe in the rule of law. I do believe in the Bill of Rights. I do believe in the importance of democracy, but I don't believe in civics. So that's going to be a hard row to hoe, I realize, but I'm going to endeavor to do that. So my position tonight is that it's not the failure of civics that leads to polarization; it's the success of civics. Polarization is actually an independent variable. Polarization has been happening on its own, regardless of what teachers or academics or education has done for over a century, and will continue to do so, perhaps. But I do believe that teaching might be a possible intervention, although I'm skeptical. And I'm skeptical because, of course, we are educators, we are scholars, and of course, we look at every problem as having a solution that involves scholarship and teaching. We have a built-in bias in favor of a solution that aligns with our skills. Just as a carpenter sees every nail as needing to be hammered down, we see every social problem as needing to be educated into a solution. I don't think polarization really lends itself to that, and there's a number of reasons for this. One is the simple reason that civics has been taught extensively for quite a long time going back to the 19th century. But polarization is something that's been happening really since the 1970s in America. So one would imagine that if civics failure, some sort of decline of civics teaching, some sort of inability to come up with a civics curriculum is behind what's happened since the 1970s, well, that it's hard to maintain that given the fact that over the course of the 20th century, civics has been taught, civics has been emphasized. I'm struck by the fact that two things. One, that we are focused on polarization as a problem, when in fact, I think polarization is partly a natural process. I'm not sure it is a problem like a social problem that is something that needs to find some kind of a specific and artificial solution. It seems more something that has grown up as a result of the nature of our society, the nature of our politics, the nature of our economics. And if it has those sort of origins, its solution is probably going to extend far beyond the confines of campus or the school building. Let me just illustrate my skepticism about the effectiveness of civics by pointing out that there have been a number of times over the past 100 years when the effectiveness of civics has been tested. The first time probably is in 1935 to 1938, when the New York Regents commissioned an extensive study of New York state schools. 3-year study involving 22,584 students, involving the very best political scientists and educational statisticians of that era. And at the end of 3 years, Howard Wilson, the director of the project, had to conclude reluctantly that civics was a null factor as far as knowledge or commitment to voting, knowledge or commitment to civic principles. This sort of a mass survey was taken up again in 1953 to 1956 by the great Albert Somit, who at NYU looked at 2 years of student data. Students who took a 3-semester sequence of civics. One group of students, the 3rd semester of civics, was what today we would call action civics, involving actually going out and participating in political campaigns and hanging out in political party offices and so forth. At the end of that 3-year study, Albert Somit had to admit in his report, quote, "No significant change of attitude was produced by any of the courses." I could go through other studies from the 1960s, the 1970s, even as up to last year, that have shown effectively no appreciable statistical correlation between the amount of civics education or the kind of civics education and students' commitment to either voting or a commitment to the principles that we would all hold dear. I think the burden is on civics to show its effectiveness. It seems to have failed so far.
Thank you very much to you both. I think it's helpful when we start these debates to lay some foundational definitions about what it is we're talking about. So first, I would like to ask both of you, what qualifies as civic education? Dr. Messer-Kruse, if you would like to start.
Sure. I mean, well, that's a complicated question because it has such a long history, right? Civics education in its modern form was first developed in the 1840s. And then it was a twist on the traditional moral education. Of course, in the 1840s, most states required the reading of the Protestant King James Bible as part of the curriculum. And civics education was a secularization of that same movement, but in fact, it was taking the morality of the King James Bible and turning it into a secular form. And in that form, it continued for, well, in many ways, up to the present day. So I think civics education, fundamentally, from my view, is an attempt to instill certain values and certain cultural predispositions under the guise of partisan and political neutrality, which in fact it really can't carry.
Dr. Dunn?
So, as a formal matter, it might have started in the 1840s, but I think you can see it even earlier. You look at the founding of the University of Virginia. There's a famous statement from committee, including Thomas Jefferson, about, well, why is the University of Virginia being established? And it's basically to prepare students to be leaders. But then I also talked about what was going to happen in education before that, and it was really a kind of civic education, so that students could understand their rights and duties and duties of being citizens, and then also the structure of their governments. Those were all kind of embedded with at least public education in the state of Virginia. Now, of course, there's always been conflict over what's going to be taught, and that's nothing new. But at its core, I think it is understanding your rights and duties of citizenship, but then also basic institutions, how they're supposed to function. I would also include some important historical elements as well, how America has changed over time. I don't think that you can really be a properly educated citizen without knowing something about the Civil War, without knowing about the Progressive Era, World War II, the Civil Rights Movement, those things. I think all of that should be included in a civics education.
Dr. Messer-Kruse, you mentioned that originally civic education did have a sort of moral framework, and that its intent was to encourage a moral discipline among citizens. And yet it's moved to a more, secular, overtly political approach in recent years, especially in the way that it's tied to our politics and our government. Now, is the loss of that moral framework part of the reason why you don't find civic education to be as effective? And if not, are there any other elements to civic education that we could increase to improve polarization or partisanship?
So the way civics is taught now, for the most part, and the way it has been taught for the most part for a century, inherited from that moral education the structure of a catechism. Much of what passes for civics is a set of affirmative statements that eventually get tested. I mean, the National Assessment of Academic Educational Progress, which has been done consistently since 1992, every couple of years assesses civics knowledge. And it does so by asking a series of questions, such as, what are the three branches of government? Can you name them? The problem here is that these sort of catechistic affirmative statements carry with them a very clear ideological subtext. For example, the answer to how many branches of government are there is supposed to be 3, but that is actually incorrect. There are more than 3 branches of government if we think of government as a structure of power and a structure of rule. There is the Federal Reserve, which last I checked spent $9 trillion purchasing various securities and other instruments, financial instruments, since the last great housing collapse of 2016. And none of that was democratically directed. The Federal Reserve is a government unto its own. One could make the same argument about the Department of Defense. I guess Department of War, I'm so behind. The Department of War is in many ways a government unto itself. I think most people would appreciate that another wing of the government, another branch of the government, happens to be those who have the money to provide funding both directly to political parties and candidates, and the famous dark money, which is now completely unregulated and which sloshes billions of dollars around every election. Most people who are exposed to the catechistic type of civics education, they hear these sorts of things, that there are 3 branches of government. There's the executive, the judicial, the legislative, and they think to themselves, well, that's not the world that I live in. I live in a world where power affects me directly in other ways. And so there is this cognitive dissonance just as there might be with the moral instruction when you're told to behave in certain ways that seem contrary to your proclivities. And so that really hasn't changed. I mean, that's been a constant, and it's I think in my perfect world, there wouldn't be a catechistic sort of a list of discrete so-called facts that need to pass as civics, but instead we would simply ask students, what is power? How does power manifest? What is government? How is government organized? And try and do this sort of as an investigation as opposed to a settled conclusion.
Dr. Dunn, I'll ask you this as well. What specific aspects of civic education are lacking, and how would improving those gaps lead to decreased partisanship or polarization?
Well, one of the things I get to spend a lot of time doing is working with teachers in K through 12 education, and it's a great privilege. It's just a joy to be with them, and we always get to ask them, well, what's the thing that you need most? And the thing that they almost always say is more class time. We do see that there's been an increased emphasis on certain kinds of subjects that are there are high-stakes tests around. Civics is not one of those. So I think that would be a basic matter that we do devote less time to it now than we used to. Some of that was driven, much of that I think was driven by No Child Left Behind. On this question of what's actually included with government, if I'm not mistaken, it sounds like Professor Messer-Kruse is coming close to saying that there might be something illegitimate about the administrative state. And if that's the case, then welcome. I'm glad to hear that. I'm certainly not opposed to someone raising questions about the legitimacy of agencies that are subject to very limited political oversight, exercising this enormous control over our lives. I'm happy to do that. I think we could still correct the question where it's not that problematic to say how many branches of government does the Constitution establish, and move on from there. And I still think the evidence does show that even just a basic knowledge of those things does seem to have a salutary effect on people's political attitudes and behavior. And so if we could just increase that, I think it would go a long way in helping the situation that we're in today.
Dr. Dunn, I want to focus on some of the evidence that you've cited proving that civic education does improve people's attitudes towards each other and towards their government. There are countries with very strong civic education systems that are still experiencing rapidly increasing polarization, just as we are here in the United States. Germany is one of those. They have a very strong and robust civic education model, and yet Germany has experienced increasing polarization, specifically over the issue of immigration, just as we have here in the U.S. So does that suggest that some of these political debates are due to a much deeper moral divide than just a difference in opinion on how to work these things out politically?
You're correct that we do see increasing negative partisanship emerging around the globe. But I don't know that necessarily changes the fact that, at least in the United States, the evidence that we have indicates that civic knowledge does seem to be strongly correlated with political tolerance. So we'd have to look at the particular circumstances of each country. With Germany, I think my guess is that actually immigration is even a more significant issue for them than it is for us here. But I can't say that I have an expertise in that. And just because they have a strong civics education, I don't know what it looks like, what's included with it, and again, there could be political disagreement about what should be part of their civic education. But so even if there are countries where they seem to have robust civics education, just because they still seem to be having problems doesn't mean that in the United States there's not an obvious connection between poor civics knowledge, low civic knowledge, and increasing ideological and political polarization.
Dr. Messer-Kruse, I think that the data on the generational divide in the United States is also very interesting on this topic. The data shows that older generations tend to show much stronger partisan loyalty. They tend to be more polarized, whereas younger adults tend to be a little bit more open-minded. They tend to identify as independent more than their parents and their grandparents. So what could explain this difference, if not the changing educational standards in the country over the past several decades?
Well, it's a complicated picture, but I think if we're going to talk about the correlations between various categories of identity and various groups and polarization, the data is very clear. The strongest correlation that exists is between socioeconomic class and polarization. And it runs in the way that most people, opposite to the way most people would presume. Most people, I think, would presume that people of low socioeconomic status would have the most polarized beliefs and identity. In fact, it runs the opposite way. All the data shows that those at the higher end of the socioeconomic spectrum are more subject to polarization than those at the bottom. In fact, we can see this because those at the bottom of the economic divide vote in far smaller numbers. And I think there's a presumption that those non-voters must be doing so because they don't care, they're apathetic, they're alienated from the system. No, in fact, they are motivated non-voters. They're motivated in the sense that they see voting as irrelevant to the problems that they face. They make a shrewd, realistic assessment of their communities, their political reality, and they see that they're not given any realistic options in the two-party system, that there are no policy options that seem to reflect their reality, and therefore they do not participate as a matter of clear choice. And of course, young people tend to be more in the non-voting group because generally wealth is generational. So people in their younger years tend to have less wealth. Wealth seems to peak in one's middle of the career and then decline again in old age. So if we look at socioeconomic class and we understand that non-voters are not apathetic, but that they are rational, they are motivated, and they are deliberate, the entire picture flips, if you will, and begin to see polarization as an effect of education. In fact, the highest correlation between, say, civics understanding is whether one has attended college. College is a tremendous engine for knowledge, including civic knowledge. But only 15% of those at the bottom quintile of income ever go to college. And if we see civics in the college curriculum as a form of indoctrination, just as the old moral education was a form of indoctrination, essentially what we're seeing is that those who are not exposed to it are less indoctrinated and therefore less polarized.
Dr. Dunn, Dr. Messer-Kruse has brought up socioeconomic status as a contributing factor in this debate. So my question for you is, how do you distinguish civic education as the primary cause rather than just a contributing one in addition to things such as socioeconomic status?
So, because it's the foundational factor through which all these others are mediated through. That's why I think that civic education and civic knowledge is so important. And I do. Professor Messer-Kruse pointed out something significant, but I think it undermines his points about the socioeconomic class and polarization. You mentioned that over time it's a generational issue. So younger people, they're early in their careers, they aren't going to make as much money, and then as they move along, what do we find? They tend to make more money, and they also tend to start voting. And so that's not so much a product of socioeconomic class. It's just their position in life. And the same reason that college students, they don't vote as much. It would be great if college students voted more, I think, but they don't. And there are lots of reasons for that make a lot of sense. Their time horizons are different than everyone else. They don't have permanent established interest in a particular community. They probably don't have kids and all sorts of things that would shape their motivations to go out and participate in voting. So I don't think that socioeconomic class explains much about this. And this is why in American political history, it's difficult to actually see economic class as a significant variable explaining ideological and party divisions. What we've tended to see is lots of people on both sides being in the upper class, middle class, and the lower class. That's why you have books like "What's the Matter with Kansas," where complains that Kansas are being irrational because they aren't voting for their economic interests because because their income level should predict that they should vote for Democrats. The guy ended up making a bunch of money off of the book, so by his own logic, he should be voting like Republican now. But it turns out that it's much more complicated and messy in America. Just class does not have a lot of statistical power when predicting the voting behavior of American citizens.
So a question for both of you. I'll start with you, Dr. Messer-Kruse. Could the recent fixation in our politics on identity and identity politics in general also be a contributing factor to increased polarization?
Oh, it definitely is. And I think the baseline we should look at is late 19th century. From about 1840 to about 1898, something over 70% of eligible voters voted in every presidential election. And then suddenly in the 20th century, these numbers collapsed down in the 50 percentile, and they have stayed there more or less consistently with a little blip here at the New Deal, and a little blip here in the very last election, by the way. But for the most part, it's languished around the 50% mark. Many scholars have attempted to explain this, and I think the best explanation is that, as Burnham and Verba have well documented, that there was essentially a collapse of class-based politics coming into the 20th century. The 19th century was a class-based politics. The two parties by the end of the 19th century clearly defined themselves by socioeconomic class and by class appeals. In the 20th century, for various reasons, a lot of it having to do with the nation's great divide on race, both political parties abandoned class appeals and attempted to create broad coalitions ignoring class. To the point where in 1950, the American Political Science Association put out a report saying the great problem in America is a lack of polarization. The problem is that voters don't have any choices because neither political party stands for anything. How far we've come. Well, what happened since 1950, of course, is the Civil Rights Movement and political parties beginning to sort on the basis of racial identity, not on class. And that sorting, I think, is the primary driver of what we call today polarization. But I'm very skeptical that polarization is really something that we need to worry about. First of all, as I mentioned before, it doesn't encompass non-voters because we simply write them off. We say non-voters aren't really part of the polarization because they're not partisan at all. But we forget how many of them there are. For about the last 10 or so elections, nobody was the winner of the election. In 2016, 27% of the voting public voted for Donald Trump, 28% voted for Hillary Clinton, and 41% voted for nobody by staying home. The great majority of Americans vote no, and they do so because the political parties just simply don't represent them. And I wouldn't call that polarization in a negative sense. I would call that a real failure of our political system.
And you don't think that encouraging them through civic education to get engaged would meaningfully change that?
Well, I think it would exacerbate that, because I think the reason they vote no is because they have a clear fundamental understanding that the system does not serve their interests or their community and offers no policy choices that make any sense to their lives. And when they encounter a classroom where they're being told that you enjoy equal political rights with other Americans, but they know, of course, that money talks in the courtroom as it does other places. When they're told that the government works in a certain way, but they don't see it working that way in their communities, that cognitive disconnect creates resistance, resentments, and simply causes people to drop out.
So the problem then, if I'm understanding you correctly, is not necessarily civic education itself, but the hypocritical nature you're alleging of the civic education in terms of what it's positing to people.
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much hypocritical as it is irrelevant to most people. I mean, it represents the political system in these ideal mythological ways and doesn't really deal with the question of what power really means to most people in most people's lives. If civics would somehow find a way of approaching a subject in a more critical way, as opposed to a way that simply assumes that the teacher, the educator, has all the answers, and these answers don't actually align with students' understanding, then we might be getting somewhere. But right now, I don't see that happening anywhere.
I've got to respond to a few things there. First, we actually have lots of data showing that non-voters look basically like voters. And so if you just had everyone show up, a lot of times the outcomes would not change in elections. And there are lots of reasons that people don't vote. But there's not a whole lot of evidence that they're just staying home because this system just doesn't represent me. A lot of people recognize, first of all, that the odds of your vote being the decisive one in any election with a particular number of voters is vanishingly small, and so they aren't going to participate for that reason. But there are all sorts of things. Also, on this question of responsible party government, the Political Science Association did say, this big problem. We don't have these choices, and now that we do have choices, can we send responsible party government back? That is an issue. But I would disagree. There's lots of reasons why they've sorted. It's not just because of race. That's plenty of variables that go into that go into this sorting. And part of the issue is that the polarization, often it's not driven by any particularly coherent ideology. It's just pure tribalism. And so you can see the conservatives and liberals changing their positions based on who's in power. If there's a Democrat in the White House, Republicans aren't too enthusiastic about executive power, and then you get a Republican, and they shift. For a long time, Republicans were the party of free trade. Now, their standard bearer isn't too enthusiastic about free trade, so they change. So it's deeper, but it's this kind of tribal affiliation that we see more than, and it can be around all sorts of different things. So I think those two things in particular on non-voters, we just don't have evidence that they're just staying home just because they're so angry about and they don't think the system represents them. And this question about how the parties sort, not different ideological camps sort, is much more complicated than just race.
Dr. Dunn, I do want to ask, you've argued that increased civic education encourages better civic behavior, and that there is a direct correlation there. There was a 2023 experimental study on state-mandated civic tests, though, and this covered tens of thousands of young Americans and found that there was no significant improvement in youth voter turnout, which actually led researchers to conclude that such policies may be a, quote, wasted effort for boosting voting. So my question is, if civic education has not been shown to significantly influence behaviors like voting or volunteering, why should we expect it to meaningfully reduce partisan divides?
Because those are different things. I mean, voting is something different. And once again, we know that young people vote when they get older, right? I mean, this is we see this trend over time, but we also have the data that shows when you do have higher levels of civic knowledge, you're more tolerant, you're less polarized. So just because it doesn't affect their willingness to go and vote doesn't mean that it isn't going to change their attitudes about polarization or toleration, those kinds of things. Because voting is something different. I actually think voting is important. I want people to go vote, but in some ways, it's the weakest measure, I think, of actual political engagement. I mean, you can go and vote, and it's a few hours or maybe even just minutes now with mail-in voting. You just walk to your mailbox. It doesn't actually take a lot. To me, there are much more significant things like how involved are you in your community? Are you engaged in civic associations? And we do see significant declines in those as well. And of course, there's lots of research on that. But again, I think behind all of that is this question of civic knowledge that we have seen, and we do have evidence that's in decline. NAEP scores have declined just in the most recent round of testing on both American history and in civics.
Last couple of questions from me for both of you before we get to our audience Q&A. I want to ask this to both of you. Could it be that civic education is a victim of polarization and not its cause? Dr. Messer-Kruse?
That's an interesting question. I would say that it's an orthogonal relationship. I don't think they are directly related. I think civics education and polarization are simply in different universes. I think polarization happened, as I've argued, for its own social and political reasons. Most importantly, the decision really in the 1960s of the Republican Party to embrace the politics of white supremacy in response to the civil rights movement, and thereby form a new national coalition to win elections. I mean, William Rushton said this explicitly in the National Review in 1961. William Buckley said this explicitly. We know this was clearly a planned effort on the part of the political party, and we know that the Democrats were happy to align in the other way as well. And both parties by the 1970s had embraced the politics of identity, each in a different way. So polarization has its own history and its own dynamics. Civics education, it's related, but it's not related causally. I think it has the power to be a corrosive element if it's presented in a way that does not align with the lived experience of students. Then it builds resistance. And unfortunately, resistance not only to the education, but to the institutions which are trying to be extolled and lauded. So I think that's the way I would see it. They kind of occupy different universes.
Dr. Dunn?
So the question is that is civics education a victim of polarization? So in other words, polarization is making people not want to have civics education?
Or is it, we see this even in the drive among the differences in red and blue states in terms of what they're willing to teach students. So is polarization deliberately undermining civic education?
I suppose there could be, but I mean, I give the example of Tennessee and the institute where I'm located. There was overwhelming bipartisan support for the creation of the Institute of American Civics in the state legislature. And you can go read the debate on the floor. And there was just a general recognition that something is not going right. And part of it is driven by this lack of knowledge that our students have, and then that adults have once they get out of school. Now, so there can be some disagreements about it, but I think it's actually possible to construct a civics curriculum that is going to bring most people on board with it. Again, it could be that maybe, three branches of government is misleading. But yeah, just say the Constitution is established. Most people think that's a reasonable thing for people to be able to know, to be able to effectively participate. People should probably know something about federalism. We did a survey in the Institute of American Civics trying to figure out how many Tennesseans know that we have our own Constitution in Tennessee. It's 50%. Now, we actually added this question to another survey, a national survey. It turns out, or across the country, it's 50%. This is significant because in every state but Delaware, citizens have to vote on amendments to their state constitutions, and a lot of times, like here in California, you vote on them a lot. What that means is that there are a lot of people voting on constitutional amendments that don't know that they're voting on a constitutional amendment. They're just treating it like any other part of the policy process. This is unhealthy. At a bare minimum, this is unhealthy. We need to do better. I don't think that there's a whole lot of ideological valence to that. This is and the more to me, the more you can equip citizens with the knowledge about how their system of government works, the more capable they will be. We have evidence that it also increases their own sense of efficacy as well. So. I don't know that polarization has driven. I do think that what we do see is just across the country, people recognize that we haven't done what we needed to, just imparting in basic knowledge in students, particularly at K through 12. College can be a different question, but just at the K through 12 level, so that when they get out, they know how to navigate the political process.
So to both of you, Dr. Messer-Kruse, I'll start with you. If you could implement one policy tomorrow to reduce ideological division, what would it be? And why would it work better than just bolstering civic education?
Well, I don't think you could do one thing. I mean, not without really significant political and social changes. I mean, the situation we've gotten ourselves into is because of the cul-de-sac of politics that we find ourselves in, where neither political party seems to represent the interests of nearly a majority of the public. That's not going to be easily solved by one policy intervention. I guess if there's one thing that I would like to change, I'd like all partisans on all sides to stop assuming that their opponents are motivated out of ignorance. This is why we get bipartisan support for civics education, because both liberals and conservatives believe that their opponents are stupid and need to be educated. But in fact, I think most people are pretty intelligent and pretty knowledgeable and pretty aware of their surroundings. And I think it's a particular occupational hazard of teachers and professors to presume that we have this great wealth of knowledge we need to bestow upon the benighted public and therefore reform the world. I don't think that is going to happen because it hasn't happened in over a century and a half of effort.
Dr. Dunn?
So one thing, yeah, get rid of social media. That might be a good start. If we could go back in time and get rid of the McGovern-Fraser Commission, which changed the method that we nominate candidates, I think that had a extraordinarily significant impact on the way our parties have sorted and the kinds of candidates who get nominated. It rewards certain kinds of behavior and individuals and punishes others. But I don't know that we could ever go back to that now. So yeah, I mean, certainly social media is a part of the problem, and cable news as well. So if we could, but again, I think that those things, the fact that individuals have trouble kind of navigating what they're seeing on social media or on cable news is again driven in part by their inability to process it effectively because of their civic knowledge.
I want to take a couple of questions from our audience now. One of our attendees asks, isn't all civics education coming from a specific perspective? So isn't neutral education impossible? Dr. Messer-Kruse, would you like to start?
Well, is neutral education impossible? No, it's possible, but it has to be done from a presumption of dialogue with students. It has to be done with a critical approach to the subject matter. And civics has an institutional inability to do that because it is so rooted in patriotic education. It's so rooted in some kind of a hero worship and rooted in an idea of American exceptionalism that whenever teachers present a critical perspective, it's read and perceived as a partisan perspective. And unless we're able to really understand that a critical approach to these issues does not itself mean that one is taking a partisan side, I don't think we'll ever really get to a point where civics can accomplish what it thinks it wants to do.
So I think there are a couple of things there. First, I think it's a reasonable thing for people to believe that part of the educational process should breed some kind of attachment to their political community for the students. In order for a system to function and flourish, you need citizens who are invested in the enterprise that we're all part of. I don't think that that's just kind of just gauche patriotism, though. And I don't know where the idea that it's all just kind of hero worship either. I mean, the data shows, like the RAND study shows, that teaching just basic facts about our governmental process is kind of low compared to others. It looks like the most significant thing that teachers value, particularly in K through 12 education, is trying to teach tolerance. And again, the irony, as I said, is that it turns out that if you just teach them about how our system functions, it looks like it makes people tolerant. So that would be a gain. So yeah, I don't get terribly worked up. Yeah, there's always going to be some kind of perspective that you approach things from, but I think you can structure it in a way that look, America, I think, is an extraordinary country. I'm incredibly grateful that I get to live in this amazing place. Every year, people sacrifice about everything they have to try to make it to our shores. That's pretty astonishing. It's like winning the lottery, right? To be here, and I don't think there's a problem with recognizing that. But I also have no problem with pointing out our sins and errors. I think that that's a necessary part of civic education too. The idea that there's not a critical perspective, particularly at the college level, I mean, I find this difficult to believe. Right? Your own field of American studies, the Progressive Policy Institute just produced a study of the leading journal in American studies and found that they looked at, I think it was past 4 years, 80% of the articles in the leading journal in American studies were critical of America. 80% of them. 20% of them seemed to take no position. I guess you call it neutral. Not a single one was in any way deemed positive. And this is a left of center organization. This is a serious problem when this entire field seems to think that its entire purpose is just to identify America's faults and flaws. America's much more complicated place than that. It ends up being this kind of this kind of critical posture. It ends up just being something that everyone gravitates to, and you get this kind of just collective patting each other on the back because you've escaped again, the kind of patriotism that might afflict other benighted souls. So yeah, I do think that it's a reasonable thing to try to think that part of what we should be doing in our schools is teaching some kind of attachment to our community with a purpose of trying to make our community better.
And one more really quickly, and Dr. Dunn, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but talk to us a little bit about social media and whether this is also one of the driving causes of polarization. And Dr. Messer-Kruse, I'd like to hear your thoughts as well.
Well, it's a target. It's a culprit that's often identified. I think the jury's out on that. It's not social media itself that is an issue. It's the fact that 4 global companies control 61% of global advertising revenue and do so through their control of social media and their manipulation of social media. It's not the technology that's the issue. It's the concentration of control and concentration of ownership, which is the same problem we see in so many sectors of American life. I think simply singling out that one sector gives those other areas of our political economic life a pass. Now, do I resent the fact that I compete with phones in my own teaching? Of course I do, but I don't. I think it would be reductionist to really say all our problems are the result of social media addiction. I really don't see that.
Dr. Dunn, how do you see this playing
Yeah,
out?
so I think it allows people to indulge parts of their psyche that otherwise would be restrained if they were interacting with people. I think there's actually research showing this, that it doesn't actually change people, but instead it just allows the parts that we would rather see hidden from public life to be flaunted and flagrantly displayed out in the open for all of us. It's kind of unmediated access to the id of everyone. It can be kind of frightening, and then the reward structure for the more outrageous things that you say tend to get the more likes. We know that you get significant dopamine hits from this. So I do think that it contributes to it. I don't know that there's much evidence that it's because of for companies controlling the advertising revenue. I think it's the nature of the medium itself.
Great. Well, we're going to move to closing statements now. But before we do that, I would like to remind all of you to please participate in the post-debate poll. So if your minds were changed at all, just issue your responses there so that we can see how everyone's views were impacted by our debate. But Dr. Dunn, would you like to give your closing statement?
Thank you once again for all of you being here and listening to us, and thanks again to Professor Messer-Kruse. It's great being with you. Polarization today is not merely disagreement; it's distrust and hostility toward fellow citizens. And the evidence that I presented suggests that that misunderstanding is one of the most important drivers of that hostility, and that citizens who lack civic knowledge struggle to interpret political conflict within the framework of constitutional and democratic institutions. So instead of understanding disagreement as a part of our system that's designed to manage conflict, politics becomes a struggle between enemies, and civic education exists to prevent that. The American constitutional system was designed to moderate conflict. Separation of powers prevents domination by a single faction. Checks and balances makes it difficult for one institution to dominate another, and it limits political victories. Federalism allows different communities to pursue different kinds of policies. And constitutional rights, most importantly, I think freedom of speech and freedom of religion, protect disagreement itself. But these principles only work if citizens understand them. Without that knowledge, politics just becomes a Manichaean battle of good versus evil, of us versus them. America, as I've said, has never been perfect, but the constitutional system was designed to manage disagreement in an imperfect society. And civic education is how each generation learns how that system works. And when that transmission fails, polarization intensifies. I want to cite an interview from just last week from Senator Ben Sasse. He's facing his own mortality. He reflected on the state of American civic life. He said, "You don't pass along America in the bloodstream. You have to actually teach it. The principles and institutions of freedom must be taught. That's what civic education is supposed to do. And when civic education fails, misunderstanding grows, distrust spreads, and ideological partisanship intensifies. For those reasons, I maintain that the failure of civic education is the primary cause of ideological partisanship in society today." Thank you.
Dr. Messer-Kruse?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dunn. It's been a really invigorating conversation, and I've gotten a lot of material to think about and work on. I think what I want to stress in my summary is a couple things. First of all, I think we lose sight of the fact of the rarefied circumstances in which we all operate. Going to college in America is still a minority undertaking. In 2023, the top quintile of income earners, 59% of them earned a bachelor's degree by the time they were 24. If you look at the bottom quintile of income in America in 2023, 15% earn a bachelor's degree by the time they're 24. The vast majority of Americans do not get in our classrooms, do not benefit from the education that we provide. And so much of what we measure when we actually try and pull out a yardstick and figure out what civic education does, so much of what we measure is that we're actually measuring the effect of college education itself and not the particular curriculum of civics. A lot of the correlations that have been bandied around tonight are really correlations about the effect of learning to learn, the effect of college itself, and not civics in particular. In fact, scholars who have attempted to isolate civics education, and of course that's a very difficult thing to do. You have to do pair matching, you have to do family studies, you have to do things of that sort. But those who have attempted that, like Cam and Palmer in 2008, find that there is a little net effect, little additional added on civics education. This should not surprise us, really, I think. The fact that there is a disconnect between the rise of polarization and the teaching of civics, which had preceded the rise of polarization. One would assume that had civics failed, it would either not have been taught earlier or been failed to teach afterwards, but in fact, there's been a great consistency of teaching. And now we are in a new era where civics is not only being mandated more vigorously, but it's taking a form of prohibition. I actually teach in one of the states in America where the latest civics law also carries prohibitions on the teaching of what's called divisive concepts. I am limited as an educator in Ohio from teaching all the curriculum and all the ideas and responding to all my students' questions without fear for my job. Now, personally, of course, I don't, because I'm a full professor and I have a union and all the rest. But my colleagues who are not tenured or are provisional employees and so forth, they're terrified. And they are modifying how they approach all their subjects, not just those dealing with government and American society. So we've entered a new era, an era which I think we can all recognize, especially now that the federal government is turning the Department of Education into a ministry of truth. We can see that civics has become, in many ways, the Trojan horse for the introduction of thought control and the limitation of what teachers can teach throughout America. In that sense, civics is moving in absolutely the wrong direction. It's actually moving in a repressive direction, and one in which I fear is only going to get worse before it gets better. So with that in mind, I'd like just to remind everybody that low test scores on civics exams are not evidence of a lack of knowledge or a lack of smarts, but can also be a rejection of the unreality of the lessons that are being given. I would also like to point out that those who are benefiting from the system seems to be those who are most in favor of civics. And this is because, of course, they see the existing order of things as benefiting the world that they experience, and perhaps overlook the fact that there are a large number, if not even a majority, of their fellow citizens for whom those institutions seem completely irrelevant. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. I think that this has been a great conversation, and hopefully we all learned something from it. Do we have the results from our poll, the pre and post debate one? Oh, there we go. So before the debate, 47% of you agreed that the failure of civic education in schools is the primary cause of ideological partisanship. And post-debate, 54% of you agree. And looks like more of you disagree as well. Oh, it's still changing. So we'll keep it up there that we can watch it in real time. But
Okay, we'll do a countdown. 10, this is for you to vote. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm looking at the screen right there. So we have the undecideds went from 26 before to 9%. So you did a good job of swaying opinion. It looks like most of the gain
Split.
went to, it was really close between the two. Moderator, what do you think?
I think it was close, but clearly both of you changed minds in the room, so you
Absolutely.
did your jobs.
Higher.
There you
Yeah.
We both changed.
Let's have a round of applause for our speakers and for Kaylee, our moderator. I want to just for 1 minute, just to wrap up here, I want to thank again Dean Pete Peterson and the School of Public Policy here at Pepperdine for always being such great hosts. I would also like to extend a special thanks to the Adolph Coors Foundation, the Jack Roth Charitable Foundation, and all of our foundation supporters that you saw on the screen tonight. If you enjoyed this evening's debate, please keep in mind Steamboat Institute is a nonprofit organization. We would love to have your tax-deductible support for helping us continue to take debates to college campuses and promote civil debate and dialogue. Please go to steamboatinstitute.org, check out our upcoming debates. Go to our YouTube channel. You can see any previous debate we've done. They're all there, dozens and dozens of these great debates. This debate will be available on our YouTube channel within the next 48 hours. So if you enjoyed it, please share it with others. Follow us on social media. For those of you who are here in person, join us for some food and drink and to visit with our speakers afterwards. For those of you joining online, thank you and have a good evening.